You're listening to Pediatrics on Call for Kids on Sirius XM Doctor Radio.
Welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us, this is Dr. Seema Awatramani, and you are listening to On Call for Kids on Sirius XM Doctor Radio, Channel 110. We're into our second hour here, and we are going to be talking in this first segment about disaster response, emergency planning, and family preparedness. I have two doctors joining me for this discussion. I have joining me first Felicitas Livaudais, who is an assistant clinical professor of pediatrics at the University of Hawaii, John A. Burns School of Medicine, and part of the cleanup and recovery efforts in the aftermath of the Maui wildfires. And also joining me is her husband, Gerard Livaudais, who's an internal medicine physician at the Queens Medical Center. Welcome to the two of you.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here, and for you all to remember that Lahaina is still going on, even though it's not the front pages anymore.
Oh, thank you.
It's still happening, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what? If it's fine with you, I would love to hear a little bit about your personal stories, with the disaster that happened in Maui. To your point, it's still, the aftermath of disasters is not just in the first few days, but it can be quite long. So I would love to hear about that as well. I'll give you the floor. Tell us about the experience.
So this was back in August 8th of last year. And we live in Kihei, which is on the south side of Maui. What happened, Jerry, you're there, right?
I'm here.
Okay. Okay. I think we actually gave a little talk to the Hawaii AAP chapter about our experience. Obviously, climate change is causing increasing unstable weather patterns. And that the rare events are no longer super rare. And Lahaina was the capital of Hawaii at one point, and most people remember it as Front Street, which is the tourist area where everybody goes, and restaurants, so forth and so on. But it's such a much bigger community with so many generations of people back to the time when King Kamehameha had his kingdom there. That day, actually, Jerry came out of retirement. Jerry, do you want to tell your part of the story in that?
Sure. It's an obvious tragedy. I was in clinic at the time with Kaiser, and we were mobilizing in preparation of whatever was going to happen come our way. And nobody knew. Obviously, we knew the scope was terrible. You could see it. There were discordant reports. On one channel, you could see the mayor saying everything's, there's a fire, but it's under control. And then elsewhere, there were people live streaming the fact that it was very clearly not under control and people were diving into the water. So the scope was horrific from the beginning. And everyone was kind of waiting and with a bit of anxiety about what was going to show up all across our system at the hospital there and the local clinics, and no real appreciation of the magnitude of what was going on. So cases started to appear, and shelters were being set up very quickly, like at the local gyms, of course, in the high school gyms, and so I went along with a bunch of other people. This was one of the positives, if there is anything silver lining, it's about the way the community responds. People rallied to the cause, and I was simply just one of them that went to the clinic. I went to the War Memorial Gym to try and help out, and was struck, of course, by kind of bedlam might not be an unfair adjective or noun for it, because there was just people everywhere, and buses unloading, and Red Cross is there trying to provide some order and get people registered. And, there's a scramble for bedding and cots, and there are only a couple of doors in and out of that gym, and there are a lot of people, a lot of chaos. And in the midst of all that, I was told, hey, go find this Dr. Such and Such. She needs to catch an airplane. So I went over there and I couldn't find Dr. Such and Such. It was just that kind of chaos. And I did eventually, and I asked her, well, okay, tell me what the deal is. How are you guys set up? She kind of gave me a beer and headlights kind of look. And so it began. At least my journey began then, was just to try and help. And, you introduced me as an intern, but I'm actually more of admin, I'd say a little sheepishly, but I've been doing admin for almost all my career, and in this case, it was really those admin skills or whatever experience I have that were more in need than the clinical stuff. So we just set about trying to organize some workflows and set up a makeshift clinic that by and by became pretty legit, actually. So I'll just pause and take a breath there and Fely, let you take it back and say what you went.
Yeah. So, did you want us to talk about the background of the Lahaina fire or just the response?
Yeah, either one. I'm just so curious to hear about your experience, with the with dealing with families and patients, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about, what your lessons, the applicable lessons to other families out there for how they can be prepared for a disaster. So yeah, tell me a little bit. If you can tell me about how your patients were displaced, or just about what happened, with families.
I think it was it was kind of one of those perfect storms with a fire. There was a hurricane blowing through South Maui and causing a high wind, and it was dry and hot, and some of the power lines came down and ignited the hillside, and the gas station blew up in Lahaina, and then it caused a series of the above ground oil gas tanks to blow up throughout the I think that night or that week, everybody in Lahaina just dispersed throughout Maui. And Jerry, when he was at the gym, there were so many buses of tourists also trying to get out. So the airport was chaotic. At one point, we had 11 people at our house, a school teacher and her family, and a Red Cross worker and a couple of doctors who were coming to help. So everybody just kind of absorbed. And I had a patient family. There were 72 people in their house. What he said was they had a big backyard. He set up a tent. He got some porta potties, and he said, just everybody come, and they were just barbecuing, and so people, wasn't just the shelters, but people accepted other people, even strangers, into their home. So it was awful, but it was also a wonderful community effort to just help anybody who was affected by the fire. And I think that was one of the biggest things was, even in the shelter, the teacher who stayed with us, she saved her next door neighbor's life. He's 85 years old, and there was no electricity in Lahaina that day, and the smoke was, just far from their home at that point. And she knocked on his door because she hadn't seen him all day, and said, what are your plans? And he's like, what plans? So she's like, oh, you have to come with me and, get whatever you can. Just come with me. And so she saved his life and 3 teachers who had just come from the Philippines to teach. So she saved actually 4 people's lives that day. And then at a certain point when the roads opened up, she was able to get out. And she had her family at her house, dropped the teachers off at somebody they knew, and she had to drop him off at the shelter. There was just no room. But at the shelter, he was telling her once, she got him to bring him to his daughter. She was driving him to the airport, and they spent a few hours together. They had a wonderful time at the shelter. There was a nurse named Rosa who took care of him and made sure he had his glaucoma medicines, and people were just cooking and bringing food to the shelter, and people were calling him uncle, and people brought their ukuleles and were playing music. So there was a really beautiful community response at that time, that everybody was just trying to help, and there was a lot of aloha.
Well, thank you.
Of course,
go ahead.
Of course, there was, my patients and the people we helped. There were a lot of stories of very, a lot of sadness and loss of losing some family members. And I saw a newborn baby in clinic. I think was 5 days old, that had a little bit of smoke inhalation, and the parents just, came home from the hospital just a few days ago, and the fire happened, and they got their baby, and the grandparents were there from the mainland, and all they had were their clothes and their wallets, and it was just heartbreaking. And I saw the baby maybe at the 6 or 7 month visit, and the baby was doing great, and the parents were just trying to figure out what they're doing for housing. So housing is still a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sharing your stories and your personal experience with those days, during and immediately after the fire. I wonder, from that experience, well, I think one point to make, and I think you kind of were making it at the beginning too, is that, and just even saying that housing is still an issue, I think sometimes we forget that there are a lot of phases in disasters too, right? Like, again, there's the initial chaos, kind of more survival, shelter needs, that type of thing. But there are ongoing needs after a disaster has been in an area. Just to share a small personal anecdote from that, after Hurricane Katrina, actually, I was like a young med student at the time, and I went a year after Hurricane Katrina to go do relief work there for disaster relief. I don't think a lot of people think about that, but there were so many people that were displaced, and people that continued to have, who were already maybe medically fragile, or who were fragile from the sense of having resources, that still a year after, people were having a hard time maintaining their health, be it, having shelter, having access to medications, having their pharmacy still available, their everything. And it was so interesting to me, at that time I was very young. I don't think I appreciated that, right? You think, oh, in a year, they're not, the disaster is over, but it really does continue in different phases of different needs. So just curious, now that it's been 9 months, it sounds like you said housing is still an issue. What are some of the issues there currently?
That's so true. It's been interesting to watch the phases play out. The acute phase with the inhalations and the burns is traumatic in and of itself, and then you rapidly roll into the disruption in care. Like there's no dialysis. I don't have a diabetic bed. Everything burns. I can't breathe it. And then people start dealing with loss and immediate after effects of the trauma. And that was actually one benefit of being in those communal shelters, is they were there together. But while we were in the shelters, we had COVID started to show up, and once we had 1 or 2 cases,
oh my goodness,
this is not going to go well. So we started moving the COVID cases out under tents, and then another storm blew in and literally blew the tents off of those people. And we were lucky enough that the hotels, FEMA, got it together very quickly, and we started busing people into the hotel rooms, which was great because now they were stable and they had their own space. But that gives way really quickly to some realizations that, wow, when you're in a communal setting, there's a sense of community. There's some healing, or at least stabilization, that you lose when you go into a hotel room, close the door, and are left alone with your private thoughts, right? There's no one to interact with. And so the stages were kind of interesting to watch us move from that into grief over loss and how do you pull people out and get to them. They're also being split up from their family units, right? So you can't fit a whole family in a room, and a lot of times you couldn't even coordinate it that they were in the same hotel. So they would be scattered all along, they're beautiful hotels along the whole probably coastline, but they're all over the place. So the sense of community loss was really quite total and abject. So you start then moving into the processing of grief and loss and stabilizing people, and then you roll forward. And, all along you're trying to provide medical care. So we stand up clinics in the hotel chains or wherever, like we rehabilitated an abandoned clinic that was out there in Atlanta, and just got in there and cleaned out all the mess. And it was hot as heck because there was no AC in this particular unit, but at least it was a place. And then, so you're trying to do whatever you can to hold them, and people are going through the grief, and as time passes, the grief gives way to frustration, because now you've been in this pressure cooker for 6, 7, 8 months, and there's lack of clarity or certainty about where you're going to go, what's going to happen, how do I process all of these. From your Katrina experience, the FEMA claim process could be a bit daunting, Mm-hmm. So, Fely said it earlier, it's heartbreaking, and it's still heartbreaking. These are truly victims. That's the thing that keeps striking me. There comes a point where they move from being, the beneficiaries of all of our sympathies and concerns into oh man, you see people almost kind of becoming impatient a little bit with it, and it's totally unfair because they did nothing but be there. They just happen to be caught in the wrong place, and so we're starting to see people leave the island, unfortunately, and we're also starting to see different manifestations of depression and anxiety and frustration kind of bubble over. We've been fortunate that we haven't seen a big rash of suicides, nothing beyond the normal rates pre-fire, but we have definitely seen an uptick in substance use issues, domestic violence issues. So it's, and then the kids actually, Fely probably knows more than me, but we're starting to hear stories of kids acting out and fights and flares and things like that. So that's the stage that I believe us to be at now.
Yeah, if you don't mind actually expounding, if it's okay, I would love to hear about some of the lessons that you have learned in both your, call it kind of organizational administrative experience of helping manage the disaster, but also your pediatric experience that are applicable for other families, for perhaps how they prepare for disaster, right? I think one of the things that makes disaster preparedness challenging is that the nature of a disaster, it's not like there's a single thing you can do, because you might have a fire, there might be a mass shooting, there might be an earthquake, there's all these different types of disasters, natural disasters and otherwise, that can occur. If you don't mind sharing with me and the audience some of if you were to, how has it changed your practice if you were to advise a family today on how they can be prepared for a disaster? What are some of the basic things that are the commonalities between these things that we can all do to prepare?
Yeah, I think, like I've mentioned before, that disasters are occurring more and more frequently, and one of our physicians had his cell phone and his wallet and his kids. That was all he had getting out of Lahaina. If just hindsight, all of your important papers in a safety deposit box that's fireproof, or everything on the cloud, or some storage device, because I know of people who had nothing, just their clothes, and lost all of their contacts on their cell phone, photos of their families, etc., if they didn't have it stored in the cloud. And I've spoken with, a number of families and people who live in Lahaina. I think if the parents are going to be okay, the kids are going to be okay. And there are a lot of things that the community can do to help with that. For example, when people were at the hotel, Jerry was deputized that night when he went to War Memorial, since he has the administrative skills to, he created triage and stuff, not by himself, of course, but he was one of the leaders that helped coordinate things. They had some innovative ideas to get people out of the hotel rooms and kind of just interact and check on people and just make sure that they were okay. So how many Hawaiian Airlines cards did you get, Jerry?
There were a ton. There were like 20 or 25 cards.
Yeah, they got. So Hawaiian Airlines donated a bunch of cards. The cards that the stewardess pushes on the airplane, and filled them up with goodies and books and games. And if somebody hasn't gone out of their hotel room for a while, you just knock on the door and try to engage them, and they were being pushed by the public health corps, who were trained in psychological first aid and behavioral therapy. So it was really a great way to engage people who were not coming out. And they would have like spam musubi night. Have you ever eaten up spam musubi?
I'm vegetarian, so I have not, but I am.
Okay, well, I think there is now vegan spam and Geta sausage for some reason,
nice.
but I don't know why.
Spam.
But it's just like this comfort kid snack in Hawaii, like a block of rice, a block of spam wrapped up in seaweed, and it's really bad for you, but it just kind of hits the spot sometimes. But they would have spam musubi talk story night where you just get some spam musubi and just talk to people, and sometimes it's just the community getting together, and it's led by a therapist to make sure that everybody's okay. But just trying to engage the community.
Can I go back up to the top of the order while you gather your thoughts there? I was thinking about how you open, like, what could you do with families to be prepared? And I think it's kind of interesting, like, having walked the whole burn zone after the fact, and accompany families as they return to the burn zones to look and see what there was to see. The heat of this fire was intense. It was as intense as any fire's been recorded, because there was those hurricane that was blowing was like a what's it, a bellows when you fan the flames of a fireplace. Like, it just kept the steady oxygen supply at the base of the fire, and it just ripped through this old town that had all this wonderful timber next to each other, super old, super dry, right? One right on top of the other, and it just went up like crazy, but so hot. It melted cars, it melted safes, it melted everything. So even if you had a fireproof safe, it was gone. Everything was gone. So in thinking back on it, to me, the biggest realization was that these black swans are everywhere, where there's going to be these disasters actually do happen. And, we're from New Orleans. We met in medical school back there, and so Katrina is a real thing to us too. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, well, that's once in a lifetime. And all this disaster preparedness drills and stuff, I kind of you got to do it, but I wasn't like really believing. I was a non-believer. In fact, just maybe 2 months prior to the Lahaina fires, Fely had pulled together with the AAP a disaster preparedness meeting with, the pediatric community and local officials and even some disaster preparedness folks to talk about what would we do if there was like a mass casualty event or something like this. And I remember, and I wasn't the only one, I think many of us distinctly had the feeling like, wow, I really hope that never happens here because we're not really ready. We had, there was talk of a disaster manual that had everything we were supposed to do, but nobody actually knew where that was. And then, 2 months later, suddenly it happens. And I think the take-home lesson for me in all of this is that, wow, I am never, ever going to roll my eyes at a disaster preparedness. I think telling families to legitimately embrace that this can, and I don't want to say probably will happen, but it absolutely can happen. And buying into that reality and having a legit plan about what would you do and what would your family do if this were to occur. Storing stuff in the cloud is ironically a great idea. All the security issues aside, and identity theft aside, it's maybe the only real option other than physically storing your stuff in 2 locations.
Sure. I mean, look, just hearing your story, I think that you bring up some really good points, and some of the things that I was thinking about while listening to your stories as examples for disaster planning and things that I've talked about with other guests on the show or just in my life as a pediatrician and as an ER doctor. Thinking about things like making sure your children, who are, call it 4 or 5 and above, know your phone numbers or can recite your address in case they get separated. That's important. Making sure there's a reason that we have medical ID bracelets that are really important. Perhaps making sure that you have a reserve of prescriptions or, that might be important. So I kind of think about those types of things as we think about disaster planning or having, if you get separated, having a meetup point that you've discussed with your kids what you would do in the case of, some kind of common types of disasters, be it a fire or if you're separated in some way, having a plan. I think some of those things are really important as we, and to your point, Jerry, and I hope it's okay, I'm calling you Jerry, both of you have the same last name.
Absolutely.
But, I just, hearing you say that just having the recognition that in your lifetime you will probably face be involved with some type of disaster or mass casualty event. They do happen, be it climate related or not. They do happen. When I lived in New York City, Hurricane Sandy is one that sticks out to me. That was touched me very much. We all will probably have a disaster in our lives that touches us, maybe more than once. And so kind of having that preparedness is really important. While we were talking, I looked online to see if the government had any disaster preparedness, and certainly I just stumbled upon ready.gov, which is really interesting. They have some tips on how to build a disaster kit, kind of like a go bag of things that you might want to have. Now, of course, if your house is on fire, you can't reach it. That's a different story. But something that might have all of your supplies ready, so in case you are able to grab something and go, a list of supplies, perhaps.
There's a beautiful book that was written by somebody named Liz Hartline. Actually, she's moving to New York. And it's called There Was a Fire, a story for the children of Maui. My neighbor, Amy Cesari, she was the illustrator. But the reason I bring it up is in the back is a family safety plan, and you can download the book on the Hawaii AAP website with the Maui resources. It's a very sweet book, and it's supposed to help children just process what happened in Lahaina, and that there are people who are trying to help, and just to give them a sense of security and community that, this is something bad that's happened. But, my favorite guy who I remember listening to at one of the national conventions of the AAP, Mr. Rogers, he always said after disaster like 911, just remember to look for the helpers. And I think that, we all try to be helpers at a time like this.
David, did you meet yourself? Any resources that you could think of that you wanted to share with our audience for, if families want to know more about how they can prepare? I know you mentioned the book just now about where people can go, or other resources that you found helpful that you want to share with people.
Sure. The Hawaii AAP, one of our members, or one of our board members, Vince, has put together a lot of resources in the Maui page for families to look at. So that's a nice go-to.
There's some in the mental health side, SAMHSA. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, something mental health, substance abuse, I think. But they have a wonderful set of resources for the mental health side of things. But it was kind of interesting that one of the exercises needed was to make sense of all. It's a beautiful thing and a rather overwhelming thing, the amount of help that came to Maui after the fire. I was in playing some coordination role. I was definitely overrun by the offers of assistance, and it was fascinating to see how people showed up. All so well intentioned, and it was really heartwarming to see that. But our cultures across the world and even across the country vary so much. People show up with different mindsets, different attitudes in their attempt to do good. And, Hawaii is a very definite culture. There's a culture here and a way of being. And showing up wrong can actually be more damaging than helpful. And so I'm kind of drifting a little bit, but the connection was that there wasn't really a nice compendium of those resources that families could use to try and navigate the early days and even still now. I think it's much better now. It's been refined. But figuring out how to get through a disaster with the resources is, I think, still a bit of a work in progress. And at a point, maybe we can talk about it later if you want, but the cultural sensitivity in offering help, I think it's a huge missed opportunity in some ways.
So if you don't mind, I'll just interject briefly and let you know of a fantastic resource for families, healthychildren.org, which is the AAP's family site for families to access resources, has a fantastic page about disaster preparedness and emergency preparedness, and also has a 10-page resource kit that people can print out to help with disaster preparedness. Jerry, I love that you mentioned cultural sensitivity, because we are going to be talking about some of that in our second segment. And I'm going to use this as a segue, actually, to take a short break. We're going to take a short break, and then when we return, we're going to continue talking about your experience, but also Asian American and Pacific Islander families. So we will see you on the other side, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back. For those of you who are just tuning in, you are listening to On Call for Kids on Sirius XM's Dr. Radio, Channel 110. I'm Dr. Seema Awatramani, and in this segment, I'm joined by two wonderful guests who are Joining me from Hawaii, I have Dr. Felicitas Livaudais joining me and Dr. Gerard Livaudais. In the previous segment, they were sharing some of their experience with the Maui fire that occurred last year in August. And welcome back.
Oh, thank you.
In this segment, we're going to continue talking a little bit about the Maui fire and how it actually related to some of the cultural impact there on the population of Hawaii. I wanted to remind our listeners that if you do want to join the conversation, you absolutely can. We want to hear from you. Give us a call, 877-NYU-DOCS. That's 877-698-3627. You can also email us your questions at docs@SiriusXM.com. So welcome back.
Thank you. And as a fellow pediatrician and AAP member, I just wanted to call out how National AAP and so many members helped Maui. I think Ben Hoffman and Jane Hoffman came to Maui. Ben is our current president. And just wanted to see and absorb and see how he could help. And he actually helped fund some of the publication of Liz Hartline's book, There Was a Fire, for the children of Maui. And just so much resources. David Schoenfeld from the National Center of School Bereavement came in and gave talks to the pediatricians and other people in the community about how to do psychological first aid and how to just called out, gave us the vocabulary regarding vicarious trauma, so we can identify it when we got emotional with patients and how to, just receive some information, but just enough and not all of the details, so that you can refer the family when there's been, for example, a death of a grandparent or something like that. We also had a big keiki fair where so many of our members from Maui and actually other islands, Oahu, Kauai, came to help do physicals, but we also made it a wellness day for the family at Whalers Village in Ka'anapali, and it was just a wonderful day. We also, recreated vaccine records from our electronic medical records, and a lot of the insurance companies from Hawaii came because they have their electronic medical records, and people just didn't have their vital records. That was a really terrific day. One of the grants I applied for was to support ukuleles being given out to children in Maui and music lessons with the Kanikapila Project, whose founder actually lives in New York, David Blake. And they went to a lot of we identified two music teachers who lost their businesses in Lahaina, and they teach ukulele to children and adults. And if they don't have an ukulele, they get an ukulele. And kanikapila means to play music together. And it's just a beautiful way to get the community together, and to, I think, just music in itself is healing. So much support from National AAP, and I'm just so thankful for that.
Well, I think you bring up such an important point, and we did touch on it in the last segment too, which is that in the aftermath of a disaster, we often don't think about the kind of chronic health challenges that occur. Jerry touched on it briefly with accessing your medications and having access to that, or your diabetes medicine, your dialysis for kids, not having your vaccination records, so important, right? Things that we don't think about as we're kind of thinking through what happens after a disaster. One of the things that Jerry had also mentioned, I'm curious to unpack it if it's okay with you, especially during this AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islanders Month. You were starting to touch on before the break, Jerry, some kind of cultural issues, cultural sensitivity issues that occurred specifically in Hawaii after the fire. I would love to hear more about to hear your take on that.
Sure. I got to say, it was completely humbling. We've only been here for 23 years, and that still makes us relative newcomers, right? We are settlers, and we always want to remember that. And when we're going in and trying to be of some use after the fires was completely humbling and a great reminder of how new we are to what has such deep roots in the community. And, I'll just share personally what I learned, I think, some of the lessons I learned, and then kind of extrapolate that to how we were attempting to apply some of those lessons more broadly. But, I mentioned in the beginning how I showed up at the War Memorial Gym, and I said that the community showed up. I mean, after all, it is an island, right? And there is an understanding, a tacit understanding that if we don't come to each other's aid on an island, then we're doomed, right? And everyone showed up. And pickup trucks. Tacoma is like the state vehicle for everybody at the Tacoma here. And all the Tacomas were filled with goods and stuff, and it was just flowing in from all over the island. People were taking boats to get to those who couldn't get off the west side or who just chose to stay. So there is an ethos of help and look out for each other and a strong sense of community. Every day, at the end of the day, I would get together with the other local leaders. This was well before the mainland and other agencies showed up in force. This was just us. And I was probably the only, I think I might have been the only, I was the only haole in the group. The rest of them, there was somebody handling supplies, somebody handling food, somebody handling bedding.
Gary, I'm going to pause. Can you explain to our audience what a haole is?
Oh, sorry. Haole is a white person from other than Hawaii, to put it nicely. I think, Kelly, is that right? There's probably a more elegant explanation definition.
Yeah, I think just somebody not Hawaiian.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be white.
Yeah.
But we usually say haole because the haole or the Caucasian people were the ones that overthrew the Queen, and America was the one that usurped the power from the Native Hawaiians.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted you were use the terms. I just wanted to make sure we define it. Go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your story.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So, and my mother would be shaking her fist at me right now because I'm half Latino. She's from Honduras. So, but it doesn't matter. I have
to tell you, not to go off on a tangent, but it was it made me smile to hear you say that because my husband and I years ago before we had our first child went to Hawaii, and I from that time onwards started calling him Haole. So it's been a while since I called him that, so it's just going to tickle my funny bone to hear you use that term. But anyway, go ahead, continue.
No problem. So every night we'd get together in a circle, and it'd start the evening meeting. It's 9 o'clock. You're on your feet all day. You're running around, and it's pretty intense and exhausting. So you get there, and we pule around the group. Everyone holds hands, and there's a chant and a prayer led by a local in Hawaiian. And I got to say that initially, I used to see these things, and I would respectfully participate. But that was about it. But during these times, the sense of connection with the local customs, the appreciation for what it means to be connected to the Aina meaning the land and everything. And, there's a sense of wholeness that the local Hawaiians have when they're in connection with their land. They value that, the touching of the earth even, the poi that they cultivate and eat. These are very important. They're not just rituals. Of course, they are rituals, but they're a way of establishing your connection with your ancestry. Literally in the sense that, we're all organic. We will return to an organic state at some point, and out of those organic elements, a new life will emerge, right? And so there's a sense of real connectivity with with the Aina that you're reminded of when you participate in the prayers before, chant before, and hearing the native language and the native tongue and the sing-song quality of it, it's transporting. And it grounds me, it grounds others, I believe, too, in what are we here for? Why are we here? What are we doing? Instead of the busyness of trying to fly around, where are we going to get this medicine? We're running out of bandages. How do we check on this other clinic that's way out there? We don't know what's happening. And it just slows you down, and you start thinking about stuff. This exercise would be followed by a report out. Like, what do you need in your area? And these, in our world, in medical world, like, we give a report, right? We turn over patients, just like flip language very fast, lots of information transacted very quickly. And it wasn't the case that night, at the War Memorial Gym. It was slow and ponderous, and it was almost agonizing for me. And you, as a guest, I particularly was careful not to say a word. I would just be quiet and wait until someone gave me a look or a head nod, and I knew that was my invitation to offer a very short word or two. And it was really an exercise in patience that I hadn't had to do before. But it served me well, because by respecting that process, they came to trust me and invite me back and back and back. And I was, subsequent to those early days, invited into many conversations and situations that I know I would have never had access to before. And it was all simply a direct consequence of showing up in the right way, instead of showing up in a mainland kind of way. No offense to New York, but New York has a certain reputation outside of New York, where, the intensity that people live their life with is palpable when traveling, right? So that would have never worked that night in the circle at the War Memorial Gym, right? So we fast forward in time a little bit, and now everyone is out in the hotels, and Fely mentioned that, they're in their rooms, and we're really worried about what's going on in our kids and how do we get to them, and we don't have nearly enough staff to even begin to cover these. There are 10,000 people in hotel rooms. How in the world are you going to do this? And we were grateful, immensely grateful, to the Public Health Service to send basically contingent after contingent over. And in the beginning, these are great people. They're all mission-driven. They're happy to be a public health worker and knowing that they can be deployed anywhere, but they also have the reassurance of knowing that mission is going to be worth it. So they leave their families and their jobs, and they come over to try to be of service in Lahaina. But the problem is that they show up wearing their colors, and it created this really interesting dilemma, because on the one hand, speaking with one of their most senior leaders, like Admiral level, it's like, we just want to be known as the Public Health Service doing good work. We want people to appreciate that there's this whole branch of government that's dedicated to doing this work, and nobody even knows about us. So, yeah, we would love to wear our colors and be recognized. So, full recognition and appreciation, but at the same time, full recognition and appreciation that the Native Hawaiian culture is one of feeling like settlers came in and took everything. And so the blue uniforms look an awful lot like a police uniform or military uniform. And so for all the good that they had to offer, they really weren't taken up on it, because people wouldn't even talk to them. They would go the other way. These are good people who were not acting in a belligerent or an offensive way. They were quiet. They were, because we read them into the situation. We gave them a briefing when they showed up, told them where they're at, showed them how. I even tried to put lays on them in the beginning so that they would soften the look. So if you're wearing a lay, it looked goofy as heck, but, walking around like that, but it would at least soften it. And we tried to Fely mentioned the Kanakapila project. We showed them, some of them offered them to play ukulele and carry an ukulele around as another way to soften their look. But none of it worked. The uniform was too off-putting. Over time, the U.S. Public Health Service relented and allowed them to dress down. And so they were wearing shorts. They did have to wear their T-shirt, but there were, sandals and shorts and T-shirts, and it just became a lot more successful after that point. And so it went with a lot of the agencies showing up. They have their own esprit de corps, their own culture, but that, if it doesn't mold to the culture of the people you're going to serve, it can all go for naught. So our read-in, our indoctrination process for the ensuing groups that came over became more and more explicit and intensive. And by the end, the last one we did, we had everybody, not that this is necessarily an outcome, but just an indication of the emotional attachment. You have a lot of people in tears and moved to really connecting with each other in the indoctrination in ways that maybe were surprising to them when they showed up to do this mission. And we would do things as simple as explaining, just don't, cavalier wish people an aloha. Understand that aloha is really an exchange of blessing, an exchange of spirit, and what it means to do these things properly. So these are just examples of respecting the local culture and how important it is to appreciate that there is a strong culture anywhere you go. And it's worth the time to invest in understanding it so you can show up properly.
Well, I'm struck by speaking to the two of you today how respectful you are to the Hawaiian culture. And, I know we kind of teased this segment that we were going to talk about Asian American Pacific Islander Month, but I think that the two of you are such an embodiment of kind of cultural, like a deep cultural understanding and respect. And you bring up a really excellent point with the about general, all healthcare as we think about navigating healthcare in different cultures. It is important to know and respect the culture, because there is, especially in communities where there is so much, where there's a history of distrust and a reason to have distrust. It's not only in this community, right? It's in other communities that have been marginalized before and have a reason to be distrustful. And we're not going to get anywhere unless we build trust. So I love the stories that you shared. Believe it or not, we are completely out of time today. So I do want to thank all of our listeners for joining. I would like to also thank our guests today, Christina Kuzmich, Dr. Eliana Perrin, Dr. Felicitas, and Gerard Livaudais. I also wanted to send out a huge thanks to my producers, Scott Ewing, and our associate producer, Sam Doyle. This is just a reminder that you can always get more of the On Call for Kids pediatric show. If you missed any of today's program or want to listen again, you can catch a rebroadcast Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard, Saturdays at 10, and Mondays at 2 a.m. Eastern as well. You can also check out more than 24 other fantastic Dr. Radio shows and specials on your own schedule. Just hop on over to the SiriusXM.com/on-demand or search for our digital library on the wonderful SiriusXM app. This is the Dr. Seema Awatramani. Please stay well. We will see you next week.